The meeting. Next item is FC Paper 21. This is to invite members to recommend to the Finance Committee the proposal made by the PWSC at their meeting on April 26th. That is to upgrade of 190 GK to Category A at an estimated cost of 112.1 million in today's prices for the construction of a flight simulator training center of the government flying service. The PWSC spent 52 minutes on discussing this item. Let me declare that I'm a director and CEO of WellLink Insurance Holding. With us today to answer questions are Mr. Sunny Archie Kwong, Undersecretary for Security and other government officials. So whoever have questions, please press the button. Jeremy Tam, 5 minutes. Thank you. Earlier on, I said this already. I think we should go ahead with this plan, because it has its advantages, like pilots, for example, won't have to go overseas for training or get their license. And so in Hong Kong, when there are any emergencies, even if they're off duty, they can be called to service. So they won't have to fly overseas and then come back. Time is saved that way. It's not just about money alone, because if they are in Hong Kong, whenever there are any accidents, then more people will be available to provide the service. So for the entire proposal here, so it's not just about money here. I think I asked this question last time. That is, this simulator, of course, is for the training purpose and to help with the obtaining of the license. Have you worked out on a monthly basis or on average per day how many hours of the simulator will be used according to your estimate? Who would answer? Thank you, Chairman. Maybe I'll ask the chief pilot, Mr. Keith Marshall to answer, because he's responsible for the design of the equipment.
Members, thank you, Mr. Tam, for the question. As you quite rightly said, the simulator will be an excellent training tool for the GFS, and will certainly enhance the safety of the operations, but by enabling us to carry out a wide range of normal and emergency manoeuvres in the simulator that we can't carry out in the actual aircraft. In terms of the usage of the simulator, we're expecting by 2021 that we'll have 62 helicopter pilots, and at the moment those helicopter pilots have to go overseas for their simulator training. The only simulator for the type of helicopter that we have, the H175, is in France. So they go there twice a year, every 6 months, to renew their licenses. By having the simulator on site at GFS, obviously it means that the pilots don't have to go overseas. So obviously we will have a major benefit in terms of the travelling time and the time that they're away from GFS. And by using those simulator hours in our own simulator, we can also add on top of that a certain proportion of the helicopter training hours, which we carry out every year. And those two things added together, we expect that around 80%, so 80% of the time in the simulator will be used by GFS pilots and also other staff for training. So, you know, most of the time we'll be using the device nearly every day, and for 80% of the total time in the year.
Okay, thank you. Basically, you talk about 80% of the time will be used for training or for the type rating license and whatsoever. So that would be the target. Would that be also including your plan? You mentioned about 2021, the helicopters are pilot. Is there any other plan for any extension for the H175 fleet? Because the reason I'm asking is, if that's a plan, for the GFS to buy more helicopters, would that simulator would still, capable for facilitate, such expansion? So my question is, do you have, any plans for extending the fleet, particularly when you now have the Kai-Tak satellite base will be will be using it in a few years' time? Is there any plan to expand your fleets? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tam. You're quite right. Next year, we hope that the forward base at Kai-Tak will come into operation. We've just in the last 2 or 3 months achieved full operational capability on the H175. So that means that all 7 of the helicopters are now in operation. So the older fleet, the Super Puma L2, is now being retired and will be disposed of in due course. And we're retaining 2 of the 155s. At the moment, we don't have any plans to further extend the fleet of the H175. We think it should be sufficient to cope with all of our operational and training commitments, particularly as we'll have the simulator in the future. It means that some of the training that's currently carried out on the helicopter can actually be carried out in the simulator. And obviously we'll continue to review that situation as we go forwards in the next few years.
Thank you. I'm an outsider here. I know very little about this subject, but my question is, some of the old fleets will be retired, and the just H175, 7 of them have been in operation since last year, and the pilots of GFS has increased to 62, the number of pilots that is. So I'd like to find out about, given the current arrangement, is it that there won't be a need to expand the fleet? He said that he won't expand the fleet, but in his answer to Jeremy Tan, but I want to find out whether you would expand it really, because if you are using 80% of the time, and if the fleet is expanded, would they be able to cope? I mean, the training equipment. And on the use of the parking space for construction, it seems like, we're talking about a site that is in use, and now that the car park would be used instead for the construction of a training ground, and there'll be a temporary car park. I know that they want to have a convenient location for their own use, but now we have the Apple Island and there'll be shopping malls. So why is it that for a team serving the public, why would they have to use the site of an area that is already in use? And thirdly, it may not be directly related to this item, but since Undersecretary is here, in recent years, the government flying service has been calling to action to help hikers. I myself am a hiker, but has the GFS been carrying out duty more often, and are often doctors and nurses who are traveling together with the GFS who are actually volunteering. They are given some pay, some sort of pay, but I know it's not a lot, but would you consider to increase the pay for the volunteer nurses and doctors, and also can they be asked to help improve the knowledge of hikers?
Thank you. Let me first answer your third question, and then for the first and second question, I will defer to Captain Marshall. Our voluntary medical staff will go along with our GFS to provide immediate assistance. We know that they have been of huge help. Therefore, we do want to acknowledge their help. And we have thought about perhaps giving them a voluntary award or something like that, but we're still in consideration. I will now defer to Captain Marshall for the first two questions.
Thank you. To recap on my answer to Mr. Tam about expanding the fleet, we've done a careful analysis of all of the flying commitments that we have. We've carried out over the last 5 years, and we are fairly confident that in the forthcoming few years there will be no need to expand the fleet of H175 helicopters beyond the current 7, even with the coming into operation of the forward base. We think that 7 helicopters will be sufficient, particularly as we will have the simulator. I just wanted to clarify that the 80% figure I mentioned was the actual usage in the flight simulator. So of the available hours in the flight simulator, we expect to use about 80% of the time available.
Regarding the usage of the car parks, the existing car parks, is it possible for the government to ensure or get any better place, or it's the best place that you can think about?
We did a careful analysis of the various places that we could put the simulator. We even looked at actually placing it inside the hangar, the building that we use for putting the helicopters in. But unfortunately, the height of the building for the simulator is too tall to fit inside the hangar. So in the end, the only piece of space that we have is a corner of the car park. Now, the most difficult period for us will be during the construction of the simulator building, because obviously that will take up most of the car park. And we've been fairly fortunate to have an arrangement with the airport authority to have a temporary car park outside of the GFS with appropriate security facilities, of course. And we can actually use that for the 2-year construction period. And once the simulator is completed, then we can move back into the car park. There will be obviously a loss of car parking spaces.
Yes,
so
exactly.
This is something that we're going to have to continually review over the next 2 to 3 years to make sure that all of our colleagues, and particularly those who work on shifts and live a long way from GFS, have somewhere to park their car in the future. But it's certainly something that we will seriously bear in mind. Thank you.
OK， 張超雄議員。
Dr. Fernette, Ms. Tanya Chen. I hope that the government understands that the temporary car park seems a bit far away. Because the GFS is consisted of many voluntary team members, and as you're providing emergency services, I hope that you'll be able to help them to provide a better area for a car park. Well, this is now 100% owned by the government now. I hope that you'll be able to find a more appropriate area for them as a car park. Thank you. Dr. Fernando Chan, 5 minutes. Thank you. Well, I'm also a layman. And of course, I'm going to support this item. The GFS has provided outstanding services to Hong Kong. The Flight Simulator Training Center is of the utmost essence. In the paper, I see that some of the old helicopters have required and been replaced by new H175 helicopters, which have all become fully operational last year. And I see that only France has such a H175 helicopter simulator. Therefore, any training will need to be done in France if we do not build a simulator training center. I believe the FSTC would not be restricted to only a certain model of helicopter in future when there are new helicopter types, and if the GFS introduces new helicopter types, am I to understand that the FSTC will have the capability to also offer training in those types as well? Otherwise, it would be a waste to only provide training for H175 helicopters. Each helicopter pilot will need to undergo flight simulator training every 6 months. And that will take a lot of time and money. With the FSTC in place, would that mean that you'll be able to take out this overseas training, since you'll be able to replace the training with our own FSTC? I estimate that the need will be hugely reduced. Can you clarify on these matters? Undersecretary. Thank you, Chairman. Our 7 new H175 helicopters are our new fleet, and therefore the new FSTC will be able to accommodate the training of the H175 helicopters. And we'll be able to use this fleet for 15 years or even longer. We estimate that the flight training center will only be accommodate us for about 15 to 20 years. We would, of course, look at a further improvements in the future. And of course, we can change the FSTC into a different helicopter type training in the future. We'll be able to maintain our hardware, but as to the software, then it will depend on what helicopter type we're going to use in the future. Mr. Cheng's second question is in relation to the training. When we were using our old fleet, every 12 to 18 months we will need to send our pilots to undergo overseas training. But now with the new H175 helicopters, in accordance with CAD requirements, then the pilots will need to also undergo simulator training. And if the simulator training is not enough, then they would also need to go for real practical training. With the FSTC, we wouldn't need to fly over to Lyon in France because that would take up much traveling time. And by staying in Hong Kong, then there would be much more flexibility for our pilots. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Dr. K.K. Kwok, 5 minutes, please. Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my support for the construction of the Flight Simulator Training Center. I see in the paper that there will be a construction of a building and also of a simulator. When you expand the fleet in the future, would you need to add in another simulator? If there is such a need in the future, would it be better to leave some more space available so that a second simulator could be added in later? And that means you wouldn't be able to construct an additional building in the future. That's my first question. Second question. I'm not sure what the usage of the simulator is, which means I don't know how many hours you use the simulator. Let's say you use 10% or 20% of the simulator. How are you going to wisely use the simulator? Would you consider allowing other pilots to use the service or to rent it out? Some passionate pilots may like to make use of the service as well. For example, Jeremy Tam, he's a pilot. He likes to fly. Would there be any opportunities for him to use the simulator? Would people outside of the GFS apply for the use of the simulator? We spend so much money on the simulator if it's not used 100%. Would you consider opening up to use for other people? You can consider charging a fee to sustain the operations. Undersecretary, thank you. Well, I'll answer the second question. The second question is on the design of the simulator, of whether you would install the simulator. That question I would defer to Captain Marshall because he is in charge of the training of the design. We have estimated that by next year there would be 62 pilots. When our pilots go to train overseas, it would take 5 days, and that include in excluding traveling time. So the basic training is 5 days, and for if you multiply by 62 pilots, that's already around many months. Well, we can try to optimize the use. Just now, Captain Marshall said that in future, the usage would go up to 80%. The remaining 20% will be on maintenance and checkups, and that means that we'll already have filled up all the hours. If there are overseas exchanges with other government services, I'm sure Captain Marshall will agree to that. Well, I'll let Captain Marshall answer this part of the question.
Thank you, Dr. Kwok. Regarding the construction of the building, at the moment the site is going to be almost full with the construction of our flight simulator training centre, which will accommodate just one simulator. In fact, looking to the future, if we do need to expand the fleet of helicopters, it's expected that we would buy more helicopters of the same type rather than branch out and buy a different helicopter type. So we can foresee that having one flight simulator training centre and one full flight simulator, that will be quite sufficient for our needs in the future.
楊岳橋議員5分鐘。
Mr. Alvin Young. Thank you, Chairman. Last year, when this item was put up to PWSC, Jeremy Tam asked the administration whether they know of the flight simulator center fees charged by the Texas center. At that time, the administration did not know the charges by the Texas Flight Simulator Training Center. I want to know whether you have updated information. Do you know any information of the Texas Simulator Training Center? Undersecretary, Chairman, we have not updated, and we do not have any updated information. We do not have anything about Texas. Do you have any supplement? Captain Marshall.
As far as I know, Mr. Young, the construction of the simulator centre in Texas is still ongoing. It's at a very early stage. Helicopter simulators in the world of this type, for this size of helicopter, the market price we know is the one that were quoted in the follow-up to the PWSC meeting. So around €2,000 an hour is probably the market rate. And I don't think that the rate in America will be much different from the rate that's being charged in Europe at the moment.
明白，主席。另外，
Understood. Chairman, the new helicopters are H175 helicopters. Would the FSTC only be used by government organizations, or would there be an opportunity for the government staff, other people can also use the simulator center? Captain Marshall can take this question.
At the moment, because the usage rate will be very high of the Flight Simulator Training Centre, we expect that most of the time, or all of the time, it will be taken up by GFS training for GFS staff. There may be some scope for opening up on a non-commercial basis, opening up the training centre for visits, particularly from local institutions or universities, for technical observations and things of that nature.
主席，恕我愚昧。
Chairman, well, other than the internal government training, would the GFS also open up to, as Captain Marshall said, open visits for local schools and organizations? What would the standards be for that?
At the moment, we do host on a regular basis visits from schools and other organisations in Hong Kong. So I'm sure that in the future we'll be able to accommodate visits to the Flight Simulator Training Centre on a carefully managed basis, of course. But that should be no problem.
主席，我有個跟進嘅問題。
I have a follow-up question. Captain Marshall said that most of the time would be for usage by the GFS. But I see from the paper that it's only going to be used during the daytime. How about during the nighttime? Would you consider other usages as well?
Well, when we say during the daytime, if I were to tell you the times, it's starting from 6 o'clock in the morning normally through to about 10 o'clock at night. So normally it would be used for about 16 hours a day, unless there's a particularly high usage requirement. Outside of those times, we'll be able to carry out the maintenance and the software upgrades and so on. So that would cover up certainly all of the daytime and some of the nighttime.
好，
好，唔該，主席。
好，答。
Thank you, Chairman. Jeremy Tam, 4 minutes.
That actually clears some of my question because I just look at the paper. It actually mentioned 80% is the daily time, but you already answered that actually talking about 16 hours, per day, which is 80%, which I'm quite happy with. My question comes to when the simulator, I'm sure will be certified by CAD for the aircraft rating and instrument rating for that. Would you also get the CAAC or any other foreign authorization to certify this simulator as well? So that, for example, for CAAC, obviously, for any Chinese pilot holder, they can also using this sim, for their rating or examinations. So my question is, beside the Hong Kong CAD, certification, are you going to get any other countries or mainland Chinese authorities certification on this simulator?
馬機長。
Thank you, Mr. Tam. The certification or the qualification process for the simulator will be quite complicated, and obviously this is the first time that anybody in Hong Kong has bought a helicopter simulator, and it's planned that we're going to get it qualified up to level D, which is a globally recognised standard. It means at level D, it means that we can carry out licensing training and licensing tests under a regulatory authority. And at the moment, that regulatory authority is planned to be the Hong Kong CAD. So it will be primarily for the issue and the renewal of Hong Kong CAD related pilot licenses.
Okay, so that will be only for Hong Kong CAD. Now, my other question is, currently, are you doing the training over in France? And obviously, that will be including the aircraft rating, instrument rating, and the recency training and all that. Who are the instructors and examiner currently that you're using? So is it, well, my question is, are you having in-house from GFS, you're doing all the examinations already, or you're actually using the facilities, in France? I'm talking about the instructors and also the examiner.
Thank you again, Mr. Tam. It's a good question. With the old fleet, with the Super Puma and the EC-155, which were also French helicopters, and we had similar simulator training requirements. Once we became familiar with the helicopter, we were able to deliver the training ourselves using our own approved instructors and examiners. And it's called wet or dry training. At the moment, we're doing wet training, so we're using instructors from the simulator training facility in France. Once we become familiar with the simulator, with the helicopter and the simulator ourselves, we plan to run the training using our own instructors. So that will be dry training. At the moment, we're in the process of formulating the type rating training course, which will be approved in our training manuals later on this year by the Hong Kong CAD, and that will enable us to carry out the full type rating training for new pilots and also the renewals for more experienced pilots using our own instructors. So just to recap, at the moment we're using the French instructors in France, but we've only had the helicopter for 2 years.
Thank you, Captain Marshall. So my following question is, so therefore you don't have...
請繼續啊，因為而家得返你一個喺度。
Okay.
Please continue.
In-house instructors and examiner at the moment for the H175. But what you're saying is you're going to train them up and doing it in-house. Because that makes perfect sense, because the simulator will be in Hong Kong. My question is, how many examiner that you require? And is it also the examiner also will be doing the instructor job? Because like, for example, for an airline, they will have an instructor role and some of the examiner role. So instructor is only doing the recurrent training and some of the type training. But for the examiner, which is the one who actually sign your license. So my question is, how many of those instructors and or the approved examiner that you require for these operations? And my second question will be, for those who gain extra qualification within the GFS, are they going to get extra allowance? My opinion is they should, because they're doing something extra, and extra qualification can sign the license. So I believe the bureau should consider those pilots with those qualifications should get extra allowance if that's not in the plan. Thank you.
馬機長。
Mr. Marshall.
At the moment, the interim solution, we're doing most of the training and testing on the actual helicopter. So we already have 5 approved examiners on the helicopter, and that's sufficient for the number of pilots that we have. When we move into the simulator, I expect that we'll probably have slightly more approved simulator examiners, because and less on the helicopter. In terms of instructors, you're quite right again, we'll have more training captains qualified on the helicopter and in the simulator than examiners. Because of the number of different roles that we carry out, from search and rescue to firefighting, for night flying, and so on, we need role training captains for each of these different roles. So we'll probably have, with 62 pilots, up to 12 role training captains. So that's 12 role training captains and maybe 5 or 6 approved examiners.
So I haven't quite answered my last question. Do they receive any extra allowance?
Sorry, that's probably above my pay grade, but most of our examiners are qualified at least at the senior pilot level, so their remuneration is more than most of their operational colleagues. Pilot ones, the operational frontline guys, And most of the, in fact, all of the examiners are ranked at senior pilot, so they actually get a little bit more remuneration than their normal operational colleagues at the moment.
All right, thank you.
好，可以冇其他問題咧，本人
Barring any other questions, the bell will be rung.
冇人翻嚟。應該有人喺度嘅，冇你一個都冇。可能好多真係走咗，因為諗住冇咩。本人現在將 FCL 2019
I now put FCL 2019-20, number 21 to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Those against, please raise your hand. The majority of members are in favor of the proposal. The proposal is passed. We move on to the next item, FCL 2019-20, number 40. The item invites members to approve a supplementary provision of $2 billion under Head 184 transfers to funds, subhead 992 payment to the Innovation and Technology Fund to enable the creation of a commitment for setting up a funding scheme to subsidize manufacturers to set up new smart production lines in Hong Kong. And B, a supplementary provision of $2 billion under Head 184 transfers to funds, subhead 987 payment to the Capital Investment Fund to enable the creation of a commitment to inject $2 billion as equity from the Capital Investment Fund to the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation for developing the Microelectronics Center. The Innovation and Technology Bureau consulted the Commerce and Industry panel on the relevant proposal on the 21st of May last year. The panel scrutinized the proposal for about 46 minutes. To address questions from members, we have the newly appointed Secretary for Innovation and Technology, Mr. Alfred Sid, and his team. Members who intend to speak, please press the button. Mr. Ronick Chan, 5 minutes. Thank you. At the CI panel meeting on the 21st of May last year, I expressed my support, but I'd like to follow on a few issues.
Under the reindustrialization scheme, the government's matching of 1 to 2 to get the support, subject to a ceiling of 1.5 million, whoever is the lowest. I said that the government's supporting 33%, and yet Now, with this production lines, are you sure that this program will be attractive enough? Pledging from the government, would it be possible for the more capital to be raised through more pledges of collateral? And also the Innovation and Technology Secretary said that even though the government would, for production lines, set up a statutory pledge, but or financial support, but then there will be a possibility for the transfer of shares or to bring in new investors. If an enterprise wants to introduce new shareholders or transfer ownership rights, would prior approval from the government be needed? And also, what would be the criteria used when it comes to transfer of property ownership rights? And also, now for the microelectronics center, the paper says that in early 2020, S3 is supposed to do it.
Would this affect the plans of certain companies who wish to move in? The director or commissioner for innovation and technology said in the meeting last year that about 10 microelectronics enterprises would enter the facility. We are investing to attract 10 companies. Is there a minimum amount of or a minimum investment requirement on these enterprises so that our commitments would be proportional? We consulted various chambers and associations and we received their support. We saw that if we are to attract high-end technology companies to Hong Kong, government commitment is important. And having said that, we must consider the use of public funds. If we can provide 1/3 of $50 million, it would be appealing for many companies. We would work to promote our plans in order to appeal to companies. For the rest, I would defer to Ms. Choi, Permanent Secretary. As for remortgaging, basically this is possible. If they, in terms of priorities, the government would take precedence. Our idea is to retain the production lines in Hong Kong instead of having companies move out quickly. And for this reason, any change in equity or introduction of investors, basically our funding on the production lines will not be affected, provided that we are informed. But basically, this is allowed. As for the microelectronics center, at the panel meeting last year, we expected 10 companies. So this was an estimate. As for the actual companies who move in, by the time we open up the venue for rents, we would have to look at the specific applications. We do not set a minimum on the sum of investment, but for companies to move in, we would vet their scope of work, whether they engage in chip design, etc. If they engage in such businesses, we will look at their scope and whether there's a need for them to use the microelectronics center. Time-wise, we expected the funding to be approved sooner, and now there is a slight delay, but we would talk to the HKSTPC. By 2021 to 22, we hope to commission the facility. Mr. Charles Mok. First of all, I'd like to welcome the newly appointed secretary. We have been talking about reindustrialization for quite a few years. I'm sure Hong Kong people might have mixed feelings. Some people might not support the development of industries, while others are waiting for specific work to be done. Given the global endemic, Hong Kong people might have different feelings. And in terms of face masks, they are not cutting-edge technology. We know you would be producing reusable masks, but this is not what we call high-end technology. Many countries in the world are producing their own respirators. So if we look at the bigger picture, now might be the right time for us to consider new opportunities and challenges in reindustrialization. With the reshuffle of the global supply chain, this could be an opportunity or a challenge for Hong Kong. Some countries are moving their production lines out of the mainland. Would Hong Kong become a choice for them or an option for them? Or would they prefer another destination? When we talked about reindustrialization in the past, we targeted certain industries and technologies, including microelectronics. But in terms of strategy, are we going to make adjustments based on the latest situation? I think this is much needed. We would not ignore the need for reindustrialization because many countries are manufacturing certain materials or supplies. So this is the wider question. And more specifically for the Microelectronics Center, can you remind us about the choice of venue? I have forgotten about it. And in terms of its positioning, last time you said some companies showed interest and most of them were foreign companies or overseas companies. Was that the case? Can you provide an update on the current situation? Secretary, thank you. Hong Kong developed products are of very good quality, but our developments have been rather slow. We want to bring high-end technology or manufacturing to Hong Kong. We want to create opportunities out of challenges. That is why we are seeking funding. We saw that Hong Kong's industries can fulfill their strengths. We have the legal infrastructure and we have the manpower to support these developments. In terms of venue, it will be located in Yuen Long. We expect the Microelectronics Center to support high-end microelectronics development in the future. Our overall plan on reindustrialization did not change. When we discussed the plan in the past, some enterprises showed interest, including local and overseas companies. A year on, because of the epidemic, the economic position has changed, and I'm sure we would have to look at our plans going forward. And because of the endemic, there were companies who were interested to invest in production lines. For example, those manufacturing important supplies. Some are rather basic commodities, others involve intellectual properties. So we saw new opportunities. We would discuss with all interested companies to see which of them are suitable. They might not move into the microelectronics center, but we would discuss with each of them.
有關
Issuing on reindustrialization basically is about the smart production lines. Hopefully, Hong Kong can further enhance its influence in the field of industrialization. I think the mainland or Singapore or Taiwan would be interested. With this policy, what about our advantage in terms of tax revenue? Comparing with neighboring regions, can we perhaps offer more tax concessions to make the scheme even more attractive? And secondly, how about the scale and the requirements for manpower? Having poured so much money into it, are you expecting certain scale? Otherwise, if it's scale is too small, then would it be actually what you want? So any criteria for the staff to be employed, number of staff employed, and the scale? And thirdly, what about ratio of local and overseas talents? The paper says that Hong Kong has talents in the area, and some other countries do have their requirement on hiring or reserving a certain percentage of manpower for locals. So what is your requirement here? And fourthly, have you asked whether our Hong Kong business people are interested? Would they be given priority? Or are you going to let local and overseas business people to compete on an equal footing? On the mainland, I think mainland business people are given priority. So what about Hong Kong? Are you offering priority to locals or what? 4 questions. Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Yu's question, first part is about support measures to promote reindustrialization and to promote high-tech development. Now, we're trying to get your support to give the funding for our support scheme. Overall, the government policy, whether in nurturing, attracting talents, we will provide a support. In research and development, there'll be tax incentives. We won't put everything in one paper alone for your scrutiny. For tax concessions, talent training, financial support, they are various areas where we'll work on. For high-tech, it is, relatively speaking, automated. So depending on various projects, the number of staff needed would vary. So it's quite difficult at this stage for us to determine minimum staffing. But let me stress, as long as the industry is landed in Hong Kong, the overall support measures, whether in terms of financial support, logistics, and so forth, they will lead to improvement in the local manpower market. Not necessarily that we need a lot of people in the production line. For some production lines, they could be called dark factory. That means there's no need to turn on the lights. Peopleless, the production work can be done without input of manual labor. But of course, we need to have the materials present, and that can enhance manpower. My PS will supplement. Chairman, as for whether Hong Kong business people will be given priority, our main requirement for the funding scheme is that for Hong Kong locally established companies, whether their shareholders are from Hong Kong, that would not be of concern to us, as long as it's a locally established company that will be eligible. We think that Hong Kong's advantages all along, as the Secretary said, is we are able to attract top-notch scientific research organizations and talents to come. If we can continue with that, then we won't mind where they're from because their presence would be beneficial to reindustrialization and research and development. Have you asked about the local traders, whether they're interested? Yes, in mapping out this plan, we did talk to various chambers of commerce, particularly those enterprises interested. We have direct contacts with them. And many of them expressed interest, and some want to establish new production lines. And some others wanted to have their portion of production with the highest added value. They want to bring that to Hong Kong because of our advantages in the system and in our intellectual property protection. Ho Kai Ming, 5 minutes. Thank you. FTU supports this funding scheme, but I'd like to talk to the secretary. There's a point in the paper that I don't agree. You said that there are lots of related talents in Hong Kong. But in the past few months when we are making masks, I personally feel that there are no talents here in relation to the production of masks. I know Ivan liaised with relevant parties a lot for us. I'd like to thank the ITB for having with production of masks. But still, it shows that when it comes to reindustrialization in Hong Kong, there's a need for big change. Don't just think that the masks may look simple, involving few materials, but all these materials are not found in Hong Kong. So we have to procure in many places for the materials. During the epidemic, we could not go back to the mainland to look at the materials. And even for the strings needed for the masks, we need to return a lot of the orders because you have to look at the actual materials in person. Otherwise, the strings or the materials proposed may not be usable. And also, a lot of the parts tiny parts need to be manufactured. If you want to, we need to wait or for the transport of the parts to be shipped to Hong Kong from the mainland just for the engraving of our name, FTU, on the mask. And the paper also mentions that there may be work that do not require manual labor. But then you have to get people who can assemble the machines. Germany is here. Maybe her machine works better. Our machine works, but then in Hong Kong, those who know how to assemble the machines, very few. Hong Kong, there's only one master in this area because we didn't have any production lines in this area. We managed to produce the masks because we find various laborers to help, including the electrical mechanical engineering department. We also got masters who worked at the MTRC or masters who worked at shipping factory to help, who are familiar with the related work. So if we could find people or talents from the mainland, then we would be able to produce the masks in a more stable manner. So I don't think that we have enough talents here. We have university graduates who are more specialized in the upstream. But for downstream talents, we lack talents in the downstream. They don't know how to, because we don't have people who know how to assemble machines. I know Correction Services Department has machines, but they don't have anyone who know how to, because these machines were donated by people or companies which didn't have the manpower to run them, or who knew how to run them. So for reindustrialization in Hong Kong, in the previous years, we've concentrated too much on the cloud. That would increase the GDP, but you have to think about how we can introduce changes by having more mid-end talents. Otherwise, we cannot have reindustrialization so smoothly. You need to have mid-end talents, people who know how to make patterns. Because you don't have to work opportunities to train up the talents. you may need to choose particular areas you want to train talents in, and yet you have to provide the opportunities locally to train up the mid-end talents or midstream talents. Because that's what I wanted to share with the Secretary. I hope that you may have to think about making some sort of adjustment. Any response? Yes, Mr. Ho's analysis does reflect the situation in Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to have a glorious time in industrialization, but because of economic development, our technical staff at some stage they disappeared. We now have a shortage of technical staff. It may be a problem with chicken and egg. You have the demand, you have the production lines for a particular technology, then the demand for talents emerge. But now, because there's no demand, then the talents would disappear. Through the funding scheme, I hope that we can bring in some production lines back to Hong Kong and to promote or to drive the development of high tech. Then with that, we can create a demand for technical staff or related talents, and there will be jobs for them. A promotion of STEM education targets at, besides training up talents for high-end industry, research and development, technical staff is also an important driver of growth. So we are trying to provide all sorts of support. In Lo Wu, a production line there, actually involved workers from Hong Kong. Hong Kong workers created the production line there. Okay, Ho Kai Ming? Okay, I think I'll finish, but I hope that the Secretary can, reinstate some apprenticeship scheme at the Electrical Mechanical Engineering Department to try to train up more technical talents in Hong Kong. Holden Chow, next minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Of course, I welcome the government's provision of support for reindustrialization. For reindustrialization, whether for me, myself, or my colleagues, many are so concerned about it because this can help provide another outlet for economic growth in Hong Kong. I've said this before on various occasions. Now, today's epidemic is such that many countries, for all sorts of production bases, they may reshuffle them. The mainland, in the Greater Bay Area, in the past, the production bases have advantages because the supply chain is so comprehensive there on the mainland. The parts can be found totally easily located through the supply chain. So that gives the mainland manufacturers an advantage. So people talk about moving their factories away from China, but then with more thoughts, they would put that idea on hold. Now, Hong Kong's opportunity lies in, as mentioned in the paper, since we have this new arrangement for reindustrialization, Hong Kong should seize the opportunity to develop high tech. Or the most difficult part of the production could be based in Hong Kong. That fits in with our positioning. Now the government, with this funding arrangement, the paper says, the government's support and the enterprises concerned will have a ratio of 1 to 2 in the matching arrangement, because you have to make sure that after the government has poured in the money, you would sell the shares. That's correct. But can you tell us, in your plan, says money has been invested in the company, and as the company keeps running, how can you make sure that their marketing is done worldwide, so that overseas buyers will be aware of the Made in Hong Kong brand? We've spent so much resources, and we hope that of course, not just jobs are created in Hong Kong, but more importantly, we hope to see that economically speaking, if we can sell our products overseas and tell the world about the Made in Hong Kong brand, and that will result in more economic benefits. So the question is, how are you going to do a good job with marketing worldwide? That's an important part. So now I'd like to hear from the government. Have you got any plans or ideas to help the company once their products are ready? Of course, they would need to make a profit out of the products, but how are they going to effectively market the products worldwide, telling them that this is a new Hong Kong brand? Only then can our place be better known. Like Germany is an example of success. Singapore, Israel has also done well in that regard because the whole world knows about their brands. So Secretary or other officials, can they answer me about your plans? Secretary, Mr. Chang's point exactly reflects what the current term of the government wants to do. We are positioning Hong Kong as not just a service provider, regulator, but also a facilitator and promoter for high-end or high-tech. The government has great support, and the latest funding scheme is intended to provide financial support to get more high-tech be based in Hong Kong. And what more we need to do is to effectively promote and market the products worldwide so that people know that these are made in Hong Kong. People will be more aware of this Made in Hong Kong effort. But let me stress that we can only take one step at a time. We need to have the production line created here first. We need to nurture our own talents. And as Mr. Charles said, that he exactly captures what we need to do, from development, confirmation to commercialization. Commercialization of products is what Hong Kong needs to do. For details, I would discuss more or report back to Mr. Chow and other members later. But let me stress, that's exactly my direction, our direction. Elizabeth Quat, 5 minutes. Thank you, Secretary, for coming to today's meeting, first of all. And of course, I support the funding proposal. And I also agree that Hong Kong is in a position to have reindustrialization in high tech. Several questions. Firstly, today, Hong Kong's is actually clouded by internal strife and external issues. There are some investment projects from abroad that, because of the anti-extradition bill protests, were put on hold. Now you're launching this support scheme, but have you done any assessment on the impact? That is, people who expressed interest in investing, companies, enterprises, have they decided to change their mind now? Now, with the $2 billion cash injection, do you think that the money can be used at all? What is your assessment of the situation now? And secondly, would you have any strategic points to consider in your assessment of the industries to support maybe the fields that could or material supplies, locally supplies to help people fight the epidemic? Would that be one of your consideration in promoting reindustrialization, promoting new industries? Do you have any strategic fields in mind or factories in mind that you think that should give more marks, that would give more marks in terms of giving them the support? Any assessment at all? In the past, high-tech products, developing them in Hong Kong were fraught with obstacles. There are products that had the research and development done in Hong Kong, but when it came to producing and marketing, there were difficulties. One, for example, is they could not be produced in Hong Kong because of lack of space and talents or manpower.
Now the government is proposing to support them, but do we have enough manpower? would we have the conditions to actually to support revitalization? We always say that what we develop in Hong Kong, we wouldn't adopt in Hong Kong. And so even when we develop new products, it is just because that the Hong Kong government decides not to use it, then it will be sold to overseas and become an overseas brand. Since the government is going to invest in reindustrialization, and you are supporting such production, would you try to prioritize the use of these products? Well, if the government doesn't adopt it, then how can we open up new markets overseas and in mainland China? Secretary, in April of last year, we already adopted a new strategy to support innovative products to be prioritized by the government. Simply put, we have separated technology standards and the price. 20% of it would be focused on innovation. We think that this is a very huge boost. There are many departments in the government that would try to adopt new technology, but we need many contractors to support these developments. And through this revitalization funding scheme, we'll be able to spread this out to all our contractors to look for new technology to enhance the government's work. So we have already adopted this for over 1 year. We hope that through our strategies and policies, we'll be able to do more and to enhance our innovation and technology. May I defer to the PS? Yes. In the last couple of years, we see that there have been many issues with trade, and some of the enterprises we have decided to support may need to look at the overall future development. The pandemic has brought along new opportunities. New investors are interested in investing in new technology, and they have approached us. So we believe that there are both challenges and opportunities. Even with exits, we see new entries. Mainly, our reindustrialization is to focus on intellectual property, on information technology, and after this pandemic, we would also focus on important material that might be used in Hong Kong. It's very difficult to pinpoint one or two product, but we would make these considerations. We are going to end at 7, so the last speaker will be Kwang Chun-yu. Thank you. Well, this is the first time Alfred Sit is here in the capacity of Secretary for IT. Well, we have heard views that the Secretary is not familiar with people in the industry, and many in the industry do not know you. I worry for you, Secretary, that you are really not familiar with information technology. Would you tell us more about it, or how can you persuade us that you become that you're a suitable person as Secretary for IT? Well, innovation is actually a very broad topic. It includes medicine, construction, and I can't say that I am familiar with all these different industries. In the past 30 years, in my capacity as a civil servant, I have worked with many people from the innovation industry. In recent years, in order to enhance information technology, the EMSD has launched a innovation platform to attract interested people from the innovation industry to provide us with tech solutions. And our government departments have also listed out some concerns that they want addressed by innovation. Over 200 projects are now underway through this sort of matching. We have talked to 5 universities and signed agreements with 7 R&D divisions. Mr. Kwong, innovation and technology is a very broad topic. Medicine, construction, many different sectors can use innovation. I will try to familiarize myself with the different sectors and to approach the different representatives and work together with them to promote innovation and technology. Well, I cannot say that I'll be able to come up with some outstanding achievements in a short period of time because this takes effort and investment. But I am very confident. I hope you would give us some time to work together. The item here today is exactly what we hope to achieve. We are not only looking into researching and development. We also want to put it up for production. We're talking about setting up production lines in Hong Kong. We should not just work on R&D and then leave the production elsewhere. We in Hong Kong can also produce our own R&D products. Therefore, I call upon the members to support the innovation and technology sector. I look forward to working with all the friends in our industry for the better good of the society. Thank you. Chairman. Well, from the news, I saw that the secretary only knew that he's going to take up this post this week. Well, I don't want to ask you too many detailed questions. In the past, people just think that the Innovation and Technology Bureau has just been giving out handouts. Reindustrialization reflects what is the trend in the world right now. Well, I look forward to what you're going to do. Well, as I said, the sector is not very familiar with you. Would you set up meetings with them and try to introduce yourselves to them? Yes, I will do that. Actually, those from the universities, many of them know of me, and I'm trying to extend out to the others to try to know them better. Well, time is up. Meeting adjourned.